What is up? Welcome back to the channel. So, man, do we have a big job today. We got the Tacoma back in the shop. So you've seen this thing before, let's check it out. So this Tacoma is a overlanding setup, belongs to one of my buddies. So we've actually done quite a bit of work on it. We did a new bed rack in the back there. I installed the front bumper, which I didn't do a video on, but I did do a video on installing the wings on that bumper and then also the lighting. And then the biggest project we've had so far is doing the old Man Emu lift on it. He did do the heavy springs in the rear again. He normally runs a rooftop 10 on top. He doesn't have it on right now, but pretty awesome Tacoma. Now, kind of what we've been working towards, and this is kind of like the road to 35s on a third gen Tacoma. We started obviously with the lift, and next up is we're going to be doing the regear today. Now this is, well, I say today, it's probably gonna be a couple days, to be real honest with you, because I'm doing it right here on the garage floor. I don't have a shop built yet. I don't have, a lift in yet. So yeah, this is where we're gonna be doing it at. And for a lot of people, if they wanna try to tackle this on their own, this is where they're gonna be. That's what we're gonna do today. So I'm gonna break this video up into two parts. Today, I'm gonna start with the hardest. We're gonna knock out the front, and then I'll go ahead and call that good for the first video. And then the second video, I'll do the rear. And I'll also talk about how this job went, how hard it was. Is it something the normal person would want to do in their garage? Was there any specialty tools? Everything along those lines. I'll kind of just do an overview of how hard it was and how I felt about the job. So yeah, let's go check out the gears. All right, so if you're gonna do a regear in your Tacoma, I strongly recommend going to East Coast Gear Supply. So as you can see here, a lot of the work is already done for us. We have basically everything assembled. So you can see here, you still got the marking paint on your ring there, and it's all set up. So basically what this does is you're not gonna need all the specialty tools. If you watch my video on regearing the Gladiator, you're setting your backlash, you're running a pattern, you've got your pinion preload, you've got all that stuff that goes into setting up a differential, setting up a gear set. And going to East Coast Gear Supply, maybe in the long run it might have cost just a little bit more, but that cost is going to be offset, depending on who you have install it or if you're going to do it yourself, because it's going to take a lot longer for somebody just to install a ring and pinion. Because of that, because they've got to do all that setup, because they've got to do, get everything tuned in, dialed in, and then still do everything that we're going to be doing today, which is, tearing out the old stuff, putting in the new stuff. So it might offset your costs there. It might be about the same cost if you're having somebody install it for you. But yeah, this is what we got. Fully assembled front, which once we get the old stuff out, we'll have to pull some stuff off of that front differential and throw it onto this one and get everything bolted back in. And then we got the fully assembled rear, which should be a lot easier, hopefully. Pretty much just pulling that out, throwing this in. And then we got a few other things we didn't do when we did the lift. We did not do a differential drop, so we're gonna do that today. And then also we're gonna take a little bit more rake out of it and throw in some coil spacers. I'm not actually gonna do a video on any of those. If you wanna see a differential drop install, you can see it on a Colorado in one of my previous videos. There's not much to it on these independent fronts. It's really just 2 bolts in the front, pull it out, put the spacer in, put the longer bolts in, and you're done. And then usually you have some little spacers for your skid plates just to get that clearance that you need from your differential. So not a whole lot to that over there, but that is something a little extra that we're gonna be throwing in while we're doing all this. We also are doing 529s. That's one thing I forgot to throw out there. So I could talk about, different gears compared to tire size. I could talk about that for 30 minutes. But from the research we've done and looking at the Tacomas, especially with, their 2 overdrives, they can handle lower gears. Not to mention that he's got that overlanding setup, so he's gonna have more weight, a lot of stuff in the bed, and he's eventually gonna be running 35s. In my opinion and in his, the 529s are the better option, and that's the way that we're gonna go. So that's what we'll be throwing in today, and I'm really excited to see how it drives afterwards. Of course, he'll have that, first 500 miles of break-in, which is super important. And then maybe I'll get you a little update video later on after that break-in phase, kind of tell you how it's doing and how he likes it. First things first, I'm gonna go ahead and get it jacked up and go ahead and get the tires pulled off and start draining the fluid out of that front differential. All right, so actually before we can get it jacked up and do all that, forgot this is a TRD. We got to get this skid plate off and out of the way. So first things first, pull the skid plate. All right, so we got it jacked up in the air, pulled the tires off, and now I'm gonna go ahead and get this fluid draining while we start working on the outside. So this is your drain plug, and then if you can see it, yep, this up here, right there, that's your fill plug. So just go ahead and pull both, and that way you as it's draining, you've got air coming in the top and it's not sloshing around all over the place. So we'll go ahead and pull both of those and have it start draining, and then we'll go to the outside and start pulling the outsides apart and getting our axle shafts out. Okay, so we got our fluid draining under there. Next thing, what we're gonna do is we're gonna start breaking down both sides. So first thing we need to do, obviously get our brake caliper out of the way, and then we're gonna go ahead and get our tie rod and our sway bar links out of the way. And then for him, a lot of Tacoma guys, you're probably running wheel spacers. You'll need to pull those and get them out of the way so that we can get this dust cover off to get access to the axle nut. We'll go ahead and get all that disconnected and out of the way. Okay, so we got our brake caliper up out of the way. I did go ahead and unplug our wheel speed sensor so that I could get our brake caliper just a little further out of the way, and that way we got free play of everything. Because again, one other thing that we're gonna do extra, normally you won't have to, but we're gonna go ahead and pull our shock so that we can put a bigger spacer in to take some of that rake out of the front end. So we're doing a little bit extra today, but I'm gonna just kind of cut that part out and just kind of show you, if you were just doing the regear, exactly what you're gonna do. So again, got the sway bar disconnected, tie rod end off, and got the brake caliper up out of the way. So what we're gonna do next is we're gonna remove this dust cover off the end here. Just use a small screwdriver and pop that off so we can get access to our axle nut underneath of this. All right, so now that we got access to our axle nut, we'll go ahead and remove this cotter pin, this little kind of retaining cover that your cotter pin runs through, and then that's a 36 mil nut on the end there. We'll go ahead and pull that off. Okay, so next up is we will go ahead and remove the lower ball joint kind of assembly here. We're not actually going to pull the ball joint itself. We're going to pull these two nuts, or two bolts on the outside, and at that point we will be able to, that will break our spindle free so that we can go ahead and pull our axle shafts, if you can kind of see, sorry. But anyway, that's what we're doing next. Pull these two bolts, one on each side. Okay, so next up we'll go ahead and break this whole hub assembly away from our axle shaft. Usually it'll be seized up on there, so we'll screw the nut back on, hit it with a dead blow, and try to break this axle shaft free from our hub assembly. And then at that point we'll be able to move our hub assembly pretty much wherever we want it. Now you want to be careful. Obviously you don't want to put too much stress on this upper ball joint or torque it in too weird of a way. So, but that's what we're gonna do next is just get this whole hub assembly free, and then we'll be able to pull our axle shaft out. Okay, so next up we need to remove our axle shaft. So as you can see there, that's it spinning. That's our axle shaft on the inside. Up underneath there's our lower part of our lower control arm. So you can either try to use a, really the only way I can see to get to it, some people say you can get a punch on here and hammer it out, but I think on this side in particular, driver's side, you're too close to the diff to do that. So we're gonna have to put a pry bar up in there, and we're essentially gonna just try to pry this away to get our axle shaft out. And on the other side over there, you can kind of see you've got a little bit more room. You might actually be able to get a brass punch on one of those notches right there at the tip of my finger, and then hammer that side out. We haven't got to that side. I'm still working on the driver. So for the driver, like I said, we'll be using a pry bar. Oh, God bless. Okay. The passenger side was not that hard. This driver's side was stuck in there. And I'll show you what we got over there. Okay, so this is that inside that we just pried out. Man, that thing did not want to come loose on the driver's side. And what you want to watch out for this dust seal if you are prying. So I put my pry bar up in between there. Just kind of worked a few different sides. I tried also my brass punch with a hammer. You've got these notches here that you can get it on. or a chisel, or however you want to do it. That's what they're there for, is to knock this out when it's stuck like that. I tried that, didn't work for me, so just got the long pry bar, and like I said, just put it in there and pried it out. Finally popped loose, but the driver's side did not want to come out. So, all right, now on to what's next. Okay, so we took a little break and went ahead and had some lunch, and then we threw on our new spacers above our struts. We pulled those out just to do that. You don't actually need to pull those for a regear, so I kind of cut that part out. But now it's a little bit later in the day, and now we're getting ready to pull this diff out. So first thing we need to do is up here on your, I believe it's called an ad. You can see there's a plug there. There's also a vacuum line on this side. We're gonna go ahead and disconnect those. And then just looking at it here, it looks like there's, you can see this wire here is also attached to the differential on the top. Feels like it's probably a 10 mil for the bracket that's holding this wiring. So I'm gonna go ahead and take off that 10 mil there so that all of our wiring and our hose is completely free of the axle. Now, one other thing that it recommended to do is to break these bolts loose under here. I put a breaker bar, this is at 11 mil and it's 12 point or whatever. So make sure you got one of those special sockets. I put a breaker bar on and an 11 mil, and those broke loose pretty easy. So I'm not too worried about getting this broke loose after we get it out of the vehicle. Leaving this side here kind of gives you a little bit more to grab onto and gives you more control over the differential. Also makes it heavier, but at the same time makes it easier to manage. So I'm gonna leave this side of the axle on. If you wanted to, you could go ahead and pull this and then just deal with just your differential. I'm choosing to leave it on until we get it out, just so I have a little more control over it as we're working it out. So again, first thing first, get everything unhooked, and then we'll probably move on to the drive shaft after that. Okay, one other thing on the driver's side, so you can see that's our steering shaft coming down. This is where we pulled our axle shaft. Right up through here on top, you'll find another 12 mil. So it was a 12 mil on the passenger side as well that was holding the wiring. This one is holding your differential breather line and maybe some other stuff from what I can tell. But we're gonna go ahead and pull that 12 mil out of the top. And again, this is on the driver's side. Okay, so now that we got all of our bracketry and wiring undone, we are going to go ahead and remove our drive shaft. So even with the vehicle in park, since it's only in two-wheel drive, this is free spinning right now, so we can get access to the 4 bolts here. So we'll go ahead and pull those. And actually, now that I've noticed, that's looking actually, so there is a nut on the back side, so I might have to have a wrench on the back, and then you could probably get an impact on the front and just take it off that way. But yeah, kind of different there. Normally your flange is threaded, but on this one, it looks like a through and through bolt and nut. So, all right, we'll go ahead and get that pulled. Okay, so now we are ready to go ahead and start loosening our differential. There's a Allen head nut right here. We can pull that out completely. On these front two, I'm just gonna break them loose. I can go ahead and pull out one of them completely, and then the other one I'm just gonna kind of loosen off just a little bit. Not gonna take it all the way out just yet, obviously, because as soon as it comes all the way out, our differential is gonna drop. So I'm gonna get the jack under here, position it underneath the differential itself, and then really helps to have somebody with you, because I'm gonna go ahead and what I'll do is I'll pull this bolt out once we have the jack positioned. I'll have him slowly lower the jack, and I'll just kind of control this and work it down, and it's gonna tilt down in the front and then kind of roll out that way. Now we do still have a rubber hose on top that's connected. It's our differential breather. So I can't get my hand to it right now. I can just barely touch it just with the tip of my finger. So what we're gonna do is we'll drop it down some, and then I'll see if I can get up there and get that differential breather pulled off. But other than that, everything is disconnected. Our drive shaft's disconnected. So we're ready to go ahead and pull this whole assembly out, minus that breather hose. Yeah, might actually. Okay, so now we got we got both the front bolts and the rear bolt removed. So it is completely free right now. What I'm gonna try to do now is see if I can get my hand up to that differential breather. Maybe. Ah. And something else to note there is still plenty of fluid left in what they call the ad, or this little assembly to the side here. So still a pretty good amount of fluid in that, which just drained all over the place. I'm gonna stuff a rag in the end there to keep it from draining on my face while I'm trying to get to that differential breather. There we go. So I got the differential breather popped off. So now we're ready to come down with the axle and go ahead and work it out of here.
You ready?
Yep, just go real slow.
Yeah, I'm gonna try.
What I'm trying to do right now is there's a stud on the rear right here. So I need to get that stud up and out of the hole basically so that I can kind of slide everything forward, down, and out. And so that's what I'm working on right now, just kind of figuring out how to get that stud up and out. No. You're going real fast.
You got it.
Okay, so we got our differential pulled and up on the bench, so you can kind of see that's our new one. Here's our old one, so we need to get all this stuff removed. Pretty much, I'm gonna start with we got two brackets here. Now on the driver's side, this bracket needs to come off. This one, we don't need to pull from here because we're gonna pull this whole assembly here and pull it off. This is what they call an ADD tube. This whole thing will come off here. Also, you can see there, that's where that breather tube was that I had to get to after we lowered the differential just a hair. So got to get that off. Or I mean, we already got it off, so don't have to worry about that. There's already that on the new one, so don't worry about that. And then we have our bracket. This is where that rear bolt was that secures our differential to the cross member. So we'll pull that 2 bolts there, move it over, and then we'll pull this whole add tube. So first thing we're gonna do is go ahead and get this off, throw it on the other differential, the new differential, and then that way that thing's a little more stable and not rolling around quite so much. And then we'll start working on this add tube. And there was red Loctite on these, so we'll use red Loctite for the reinstall. Now moving over our drain plug and our fill plug. Our drain plug, I'm gonna go ahead and tighten all the way. All right, next up, I'll go ahead and pull the front differential mount from underneath here. You got 2 bolts. One's going down, one's coming up. So we'll go ahead and pull those. All right, so next up, we'll go ahead and remove the add tube. And then also inside there, you've got a stub shaft and some other stuff. And there is usually a decent amount of fluid left in here. Some of it already drained out onto my shoulder while I was underneath the truck. But so we'll go ahead and remove these 4 bolts, and then we should be able to pull this whole end off. Yeah, it might be a good thing I broke the bottom 2 loose, because I don't think I'm gonna be able to get to the bottom 2 on this side because of our bracket that mounts our differential to the truck. So good thing I did break these bottom 2 loose. So now I can just get them with a regular wrench and pull them the rest of the way off. So yeah, while you're under the truck, I would go ahead and just break as many of these as you can get to loose. And that way it'll make it a lot easier once you've got it out on the bench like I do. Okay, so now we'll break our add shaft loose, which if you just give it a little bit of downward pressure, you should be able to break that RTV silicone with this still attached, obviously. So now, we'll just pull it up and off. There we go. All right, so next we need to get our stub shaft out. So you can see it there, that's our stub shaft. What I'm gonna do, there's a few different ways to do it. What I'm gonna try is doing a pry bar on each side and just pulling, you know, down basically and popping that up and out. If that doesn't work, then you can get a long punch and run through the other side of the differential to this stub shaft, get that punch on there and then just knock it out. They say that there's a decent amount of pressure holding this in, so hopefully, I'm hoping the pry bar method will just pop it right out. Okay, there we go. So now we should just be able to pull that stub shaft. Well, not quite there yet. It's moving though. There we go. All right, so there's our stub shaft. So just looking at the difference in our two setups here, and nothing that I've seen so far said anything about it, but this has a kind of a splash shield in it, and our new differential does not. So I'm gonna see if I can get this out and reinstall it in our new one, and then that way, basically everything that's coming out is the same as what's going in. Now, I kind of wiped it down a little bit. You can see that baffle a little bit better in our old one. So again, I'm gonna go ahead and pop that out and get it moved over to our new one. Not too bad, came out nice and clean. Of course, it came out so fast, kind of messed me up a little bit. I had my orientation right. So actually I might pause this and look at my recording so that I can see exactly how it went, because if you can tell there, you've got two tabs on the back and then you've got kind of two notches here. So I just want to make sure that I get it put back in the right way in the new differential. I'm pretty sure it was just like that, but I'm gonna go ahead and pause this, check my video and make sure. All right, so real quick for orientation on this little baffle, oil baffle. You can see here, maybe if the lighting's right, there's a hole right here for your breather that comes out. So these two prongs here will go on either side of that hole. So whenever we go to put it in our new one, it'll sit in there about like that. You can kind of see kind of that orientation where that tab over here is almost in the center there. So that's how we're gonna put it in our new one. Okay, so now for our stub shaft, you'll need a dead blow to put that back in. You can see there's a C-clip on the bottom there. It's just kind of one that depresses on its own. So that's kind of what you're pushing it past. So a dead blow, you don't want to do metal on metal whenever you're hammering this in. And it doesn't take much, we're just tapping it in. Now, one thing I am gonna do before I put that in is you have roller bearings inside here. I'm gonna go ahead and get some fresh oil and I'm gonna just go ahead and work some oil into these roller bearings before I put our new, well, it's not a new stub shaft, but before I put our old stub shaft in the new differential. All right, so now we'll slide our stub shaft in, make sure it's all clean, no debris on it. We'll line up those splines. So now I know it's down in the splines, I can feel the gears turning, and we'll just lightly tap it in. All right. Yep, and you can feel, if you pull on it just a little bit, you can feel that C-clip, how it's seated in where it should be, and we're good on our stub shaft. So what's next is I'm gonna go ahead and clean up the end of this, get all the RTV silicone off of our ad shaft, and then clean up this surface right here to get it ready for some RTV gasket maker, and then we'll go ahead and mate these two up. Okay, so got both these surfaces cleaned up. As you can see, they're all nice and shiny. And I just used a wire bristle brush attached to my drill and just made sure those surfaces were clean, then hit them with some brake clean to make sure there's no oil on them. So now we're ready for our RTV, our gasket maker. And we'll go ahead and just put a small dab all the way around, and then we'll mate these up and get it bolted back together. Okay, so now we're ready to get it moved back in. So we'll kind of do the same thing, but opposite, just kind of work it up and in, try to get that stud from this front mount up and over and dropped into the hole. And then on the rear, once I get that done, then I'll drop the front down just a little bit so I can get our vacuum line up here, get it plugged back in on the top, since I couldn't really work my hand in there before. And then for us, we're gonna be installing our spacers, which will drop our differential down a little bit lower, which will be nice. And also give us those better drive shaft angles since we put the lift on. So yeah, that's what we're doing next. We'll go ahead and fish it up in there. All right, so now, I don't know, you probably don't have the best view of what we're doing here. I'm trying, but it got dark on us. So it's dark under here. So we've got it up. We got the stud dropped in right here on the front. So now what I'm doing while I can still get my hand up there is I'm gonna go ahead and plug in that breather tube. All right, so I'm throwing our nut on the rear just so that I know this basically can't come out and it's not gonna go anywhere on me. And then what I'm gonna do is go ahead and get our bolts ready for the front, and we'll jack this up until we can get them in. I'm just, I haven't got the front bolts in yet on the differential, but I'm throwing in that nut on the top. I wanted to make sure that this bracket wasn't getting caught anywhere or bound up or anything. And our breather line there is good. And our wiring, make sure it's all good. Of course, I'll have to go to the other side. Yep, and that bracket's all good. So I'm just making sure that nothing is in the way as we come up with this, and make sure that everything's smooth and nothing's getting bound up. And right now it's all looking good. Okay, so we finally got it up into place, got our bolts back in, and we added a diff drop on the front, so it took a little bit longer to get everything lined up. Otherwise it would have been a lot quicker. But we got our 2 bolts in the front and our nut in the rear. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and snug all those down, and then I'll get you some torque specs and we'll go ahead and torque all those. Okay, so for this rear nut, it's gonna be 64 foot-pounds for the torque on that one. And then for these front 2, here and here, those are gonna be 101. And then for these side bolts on the side of our differential for this mount on this side, on the driver's side, those were 138. So we'll torque those 3 to 138, these front 2 to 101. And then after that, we're gonna go ahead and plug back in our plug, put back in our vacuum line, which is right here, ready to go anyway, so it's on. And then we'll put this bracket back on top. As far as the bracket on this left side, I've already got it on the bolt in. I'll just snug that bolt down and make sure it's good. And then we'll be buttoned up underneath. Okay, so now that everything up on the front end is completely done and our drive shaft is, our axle is fully mounted, the last thing we need to do is go ahead and throw our drive shaft on. So that's what we're gonna do next. And then we're gonna go ahead and button up both sides. And then the last thing we'll do is we'll put in differential fluid. We'll let it set overnight, and then in the morning I'll recheck that fluid level, because a lot of that fluid is going to drain back down into your tubes and everything else, especially overnight and then after you drive it. So you want to kind of check that fluid a few times after you do something like this and make sure that your fluid levels are good. So first things first though, get the drive shaft in and then button up both sides, and then we'll get the fluid in. All right, so now we're ready to start buttoning everything back up on the outsides. First thing we gotta do is obviously get our drive shaft back in. All right, so this is where our axle shaft will slide back in. So you can see there that there is a seal there. So I'm gonna add some high temp grease to that, and that way, we shouldn't have any leaks for a long time, and just kind of make sure that's all nice and lubed up before I slide my axle shaft in. So I'm gonna do that on both sides first, and then we'll slide those in. So on your axle shaft here, it's got that C-clip on the end. That's why it was so hard to get pried out of there. And then same thing whenever you're going back in, you'll have to push until you get that C-clip popped into where it should be. And be careful when you're going in not to damage your sills. So we've got the axle in as far as the splines are started. Now it's not seated all the way. That C-clamp or that C-clip is not all the way in there. So what I'm gonna go ahead and do is I'm gonna go ahead and throw our spindle back on our axle and just throw the axle nut on. That way everything's kind of held in place, and that way it holds the axle up and is supporting it. And then I should be able to get a long pry bar in there, and I'm gonna try to just tap that in lightly to get it to that C-clip to seat inside of our differential. I will say on the backside here, you have more grease, or not grease, but you have more seals and everything that I'm gonna go ahead and grease up before I throw our axle back into the spindle. All right, so that worked pretty good. Next, we're gonna throw our 2 bolts back in for our lower ball joint, and these will be torqued to 118. I think what we're gonna do is we're gonna button up both sides, throw the brake calipers on, fire up the truck, and then we'll just hold the brake, and then that will allow me to torque both of these axle nuts. Right now, it's as tight as I could get it with our impact, so we should be good to go ahead and button everything up, and then, yeah, like I said, we'll fire it up and hold the brake. So we'll go ahead and get the brake caliper on this side, leave the sway bar off, and then we'll do the same thing on the other side. Okay, so everything is buttoned up on both sides, sway bars reconnected, all of our lines are reconnected. Really the only thing we have left is to torque our axle nuts. So he's gonna hop in, fire it up, and then hold the brake, and then I'll get it torqued down to 175. After that, we'll throw our little retainer, the blue piece on, and then throw our cotter pin in through the shaft itself. And then we will tap back in our dust cover. After that, we're just gonna throw the wheel spacers back on, get the tires on, get it on the ground, and then once it's on the ground and sitting where we want it, then we'll top off the differential fluid. At that point, I'm just gonna let it sit overnight, and then in the morning I'll double check that differential fluid, and then we'll get this thing flipped around and start on the back end. All right, good. All right, so we got it back on the ground, and I'm just about to climb underneath there and top it off on fluid, which, you know, nothing crazy about that. You just fill it up until it starts running out a little bit, and then that's it. So I'm gonna do that tonight, and then in the morning I'm gonna check that fluid one more time, and then we'll pull this thing out, back it in, and get set up, which will be in the next video. So in the next video, you'll see that we'll go ahead and start on the rear end, which will be a whole separate video. And like I said, after that video, the second video, I'll kind of talk about how hard this job was and kind of what I thought about it. So that's it for today. That's it for this video anyway. I'm about to wrap that up and go get some sleep, and then hopefully tomorrow is a lot quicker day. The rear should be a lot easier. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video. Hope it helped somebody out, and make sure you like, subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.